today is Valentine's Day, so I thought it would be fun to try something different for this week's video. A few weeks ago, I posted a video about how my husband bought himself a car for over $100,000 and my thoughts and feelings about that. When my husband Paul saw the final video, he had some things to say about it. So I asked him if he'd be willing to let me film his reaction to my video and then share it with you. And he said yes. Valentine's Day is about celebrating love. And I have to tell you, I feel really loved when Paul is willing to work on projects that are important to me, like this YouTube channel, even if he doesn't necessarily agree with me about what I posted. I've never shared a video like this before, but I think you'll enjoy it and hopefully slap a like on it. So I'll turn it over to Paul now.
So my lovely wife has asked me to react to the video she posted about my buying a new car. She already knows some of these thoughts, so hopefully I'm not going to be terribly brutally honest, or I am, I don't know, we'll see. So here we go.
My husband just bought himself a car for over $100,000.
That's
and
true.
We need to talk about this because I think it'll be both educational and entertaining for you to hear how all this went down, and maybe
So
a little
entertaining.
therapeutic for me. I can't imagine myself ever spending that much money on a car.
I could.
Unless like inflation made it so that spending $100,000 at that time is like spending $20,000 in today's dollars. But that's because I'm just not a car person. When I went shopping for my last car, I thought, hey, maybe it's time for me to buy a luxury car. So I test drove a Mercedes, a BMW, an Audi. But at the end of the day, I didn't like any of them enough to justify spending the extra money. And I realized that what I actually liked the most was the Toyota Camry. So that's what I got.
I'm probably going to harp on this later because you keep showing a picture of a 911 when you talk about the car I'm buying that zooms in here. And here you show a Camry that's like the wrong year, the wrong trim level, everything. It's a Camry, but it's not remotely close to yours. And to be clear, I think your points are valid. You don't buy something that you don't like. I test drove an Audi and a Mercedes and BMWs also when I bought the Subaru I had before my current Subaru, and I decided that the Subaru was the right daily car for me.
And I love it. When I first drove it, I felt like queen of the road. But my husband Paul is definitely what I would call a car guy. He bought his first Porsche in 1998, joined the Porsche Club of America,
That's at Laguna Seca.
and has been racing at their local autocross events ever since. When we first talked about moving in together, I was horrified to realize that he had 14 framed pictures of cars displayed in his bedroom.
In order to get to 14 car pictures in my bedroom, you have to expand this may not sound better, you have to include the bathroom as well. And you also have to include things like these plaques, which this is a nice second place one from a bad year. But see, it is like a picture of me driving. But yeah, if you include those, you can probably get to that number.
As well as hundreds of die-cast model cars.
And by hundreds, my wife actually means substantially less than 100. But yeah.
And I realized that if we ever lived together, I would seriously need him to have a man cave because I couldn't stand being around that much car stuff. When we go out, he'll say stuff like, oh, look at that 911. And I still don't know what he's talking about until he says, the blue car, Penelope, I'm talking about the blue car. And then I could be like, oh yeah, that's a blue car, great.
That point is especially wonderful this last year when we were down in Carmel. It happened to be during Car Week, which if you're a car person and never been there, that's a place where you can go down. There was a Ferrari Superfast, a McLaren P1. You know, it's pretty awesome. And of course, as I would go ahead and say, oh, look, an Aventor, or look at, one of the new Hurricanes or whatever, and, the glazed look of, huh, on my wife, is that I'd have to say, the lime green car, and to go, oh, yes, isn't that nice? It's like, do you realize what you're looking at?
So anyway, we were going for a walk with our toddler when Paul dropped this bomb on me that he wanted to spend $100,000 on a new Porsche. And I immediately felt my entire body contract, like, oh my God,
this wasn't so much a bomb drop as I mentioned, it's something I'm considering.
But I took a deep breath and said, tell me more. And he shared that he'd been thinking about getting a new car for several years. And then
more than several.
things happened that made him think that now was the time. Porsche announced that they were going to be selling this car that sounded like a perfect fit for him.
Yes, there was a fact that literally, like within a space of 24 hours, Porsche announced that they were going to do this new version of the GT4. This is something where I'd been playing around with looking at Caymans since they introduced the model. Mid-engine, this is really everything you want in a performance platform. This was the first one that I thought, it's like, yes, this is a car that's worth that. The others all seemed overpriced. So that was really a key driver, along with the fact of within that 24-hour period, discovering, oh, an old employer that I thought I had rolled everything over came here and said, yeah, here's another $110,000 that apparently you still have in our account. So that was a nice surprise that made me think, well, I'm not spending 401k money on it, but it's like, well, total wealth, it's a little bit of a wash. And yeah, some of the other things, there's other life events and things that made me think, why am I holding off?
And I had two big financial goals that were incredibly important to me before buying what I basically view as a toy.
It is a toy. This is my track toy, weekend driver, and especially with the family situation, the fact that I'm going from what was a 2+2 car in the old 911 to a genuine two-seater, far less practical. So yes, it's a toy.
First of all, I wanted to have a second kid. I'm 45 years old, so the clock is ticking. And I wanted to buy a house. In our discussions about these two big financial goals, Paul was really concerned about money, which is totally valid. Kids and houses are freaking expensive. But then he turns around and starts talking about buying a $100,000 car, which would actually be more like $125,000 after the extra options and tax and registration.
Yes, $125K, that's what it is. I mean, the car, I didn't get much in the way of options. I've got the wonderful carbon buckets in it, as well as the dual clutch. That's pretty much the big ticket items. I think most of the other, I paid extra for the color. There's a few no-cost options on there. But yeah, there's not much in the way of options, but it's not a cheap car.
And I felt threatened, like this car purchase could cost me my kid or my home. So as a coupleship, we now had three big financial goals on the table. How do you come into alignment with your partner on your goals and dreams and work together? If your priorities match up, that's great. But if you want to have a kid and your husband wants to buy a car, which one do you choose?
Wrong car. It's not a GT4.
Anytime I'm confronted with an either or choice like this, I like to think about, how can we do both? And it might be that we have to tackle one goal first and then the next one, or we could put an equal amount of money towards each. I felt like my goals were more time sensitive than his, since I didn't know how much longer I'd be physically capable of having a kid. And I was concerned that with real estate prices going up, we'd get priced out of the market. So I asked Paul if he'd be willing to trade in our son Gabriel for this car.
That's the car, and that was our son. No, I wouldn't be willing to trade Gabriel for the car. I'm going to draw a comparison because there's an issue with the car market too. The last 10 years have brought some real change in the auto market. And we're seeing more electrics. The car I'm getting, this is a 4-liter naturally aspirated high revving engine, very classic sports car. If there is a next generation of GT4, that they're going to be offering the same kind of engine. This could be the last hurrah of offering that. So there is a time sensitive here. Much like the housing market though, we don't really know where those points are in the future. But this is certainly one of the things that I was considering, that for this car, I want kind of a traditional classic sports car.
So then I shared with him that the only difference is that he hasn't met his second kid yet. But if he already had another son or daughter, he probably wouldn't trade them for a car either.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but just have to say it's a logical fallacy. you're engaging in a logical fallacy, and I'm holding off because you're going to do it again.
Even though I felt like Paul had pretty much made up his mind to buy this car, whether I liked it or not, he did seem to prefer that I was in agreement.
To be clear, I wanted the car. And if I wasn't married, yeah, my mind would have been made up. I think when I first brought it up to Penelope, I was still considering it. I knew the moment I was making a decision to spend this level of money that I was going to need to check in with my wife and have her buy in on it, because we do have shared finances. And even though this is all money I built on my own, I wasn't about to just go spend it because I didn't want to surprise, honey, look what's in the garage. Okay, there is a part of me that kind of like wonders how that might have gone and slightly amused at it, but no, that's not where I would have gone.
So I told him that as long as the car purchase didn't prevent us from having another kid or buying a house, I could get on board. I would have rather used that $125,000 to invest in assets that could then buy the car for us, but Paul wasn't open to that. And since he got on board with the kid thing and the house thing, I let that idea go.
I kind of know a little bit what's coming up. So let's talk about this finance, and let's talk about logical fallacies. To be clear, the idea of evaluating what you're thinking about doing against hypotheticals is a really good idea. I think if you don't have the thought to see, well, what could things be like? What are implications? If you don't run that past, you're not making an informed decision. So to be clear, I'm not against anything my wife is saying, but I am kind of against some of the conclusions she's drawing. And that's it, much like if you knew your child, you wouldn't trade them. You're using a hypothetical to reach a factual conclusion. And a hypothetical doesn't result in fact, it results in another hypothetical, meaning that if you had the other child, well, it's hypothetical that you wouldn't be willing to trade them. I think it's a fair agreement to say that I wouldn't do that. But it is nonetheless a logical fallacy to state that that's a factual outcome. And this is pretty much exactly what's going on here, that, oh, well, what you do is you can borrow the money, and then you take the money and you invest it, and you get this at the other end. And this is even worse because you're relying on a number of hypotheticals to reach that, quote, factual outcome. The reality is, one, can you get a loan? Getting loans on $100,000 plus cars can be kind of a complicated process because a lot of banks, just as we've already talked about, don't consider this like a necessity. It's not necessary. You're not buying this to travel to and from work. This is strictly a luxury purchase. So how you go about the financing can be a different deal. And this idea that you're definitely going to be able to get one that has interest-only payments, that's probably a big assumption. And then it's also an assumption that you're going to invest that money and you're going to get this great return that's going to be more than the interest you're paying. So there's a whole lot of hypotheticals. Yes, it's a wonderful thought, and I don't disagree with my wife's idea, but it's hypothetical. What I'm dealing with when I made this purchase is, let's go back and turn her point in reverse, which is, what future money is. Well, today's future money that I'm buying the car with is actually yesterday's past money. And since we're actually in today, this is factual on both sides. The cost basis is $15,000. I'm buying the car with what I originally paid $15,000 for in investments. There's also the fact that the car I'm replacing, I sold for more than double what I originally bought it. So that obviously doesn't include the fact that there were a number of upgrades I made to the car for track use. But even including that, I still sold the car for more than I bought it, a decent amount above. And so if you looked at that, I'm actually paying less than $10,000 in yesterday's money for this car. That's a factual amount. And in doing so, I'm carrying no debt. I'm not against, I understand the whole macroeconomic arguments about sometimes debt is a necessity, but to be clear, my situation is not macroeconomic. So for me, it's as simple as, well, if I finance a $100,000 car that I think is worth $100,000, real specifically $125,000, which I think it's worth that. But if I finance it and once I pay interest, that's $160,000 or $170,000 car, it's not worth that. The fact is, I could have bought it for $125,000. Why would I want to spend $160,000 or $170,000? Even when you look at that in tomorrow's dollars, 5-6 years down the road, which is really what you're looking at in an auto loan, isn't going to be that dramatically different. So no, there's no way I would consider financing this. To be clear, yes, it's possible. There's that hypothetical that potentially I could do more good with this money. But then there's also the hypothetical of this car is the last of the naturally aspirated cars that is going to be available, and that 5 or 6 years from now, this is selling for double the money. I don't think that's likely, but it's a possibility. If you're going to deal strictly in hypotheticals, throw that one out there too.
But I wish we could have either waited a little longer to buy the car or financed it so we'd have more money available for the future. For example, I think we could have qualified for an auto loan for 1.99% and maybe even borrowed some of the money at 0%. Or worst case scenario, we could do a no-cost refinance on the house and borrow money at 3.25% on a 30-year fixed.
I'd rather see the house get paid off. The house here in Campbell is all paid for, and the house in Benicia hopefully be paid for ahead of time. That's my goals. I'm sure you've gone into this. In fact, I'm 99% sure you did in some of your house videos, as I recall from watching that. But one of the biggest pluses, and one of the ones I certainly realized when I bought the place here, that fixed rate. When I first bought, and it was $1,000 a month on the mortgage payment, and it's like, wow, I'm kind of stretching at the time. This was, I could have afforded a little bit more, but not much. But 2 years down the line, I had managed to double my salary. This was at a stretch where I was doubling my salary every 2 years over about a 10-year stretch. And my salary was going up, and suddenly this seemed small. In fact, it seemed so small that it was a good time to refinance to a 15-year, because I was only going up, less than $200 a month, and it was cutting the time in half. So it's like, yeah, bring that on. And then ultimately paid off the last of it, I think about 3 years before that was due. And the fixed finance, that's the plus of the mortgage. Obviously, now I'm mainly dealing with property tax, which would be nice to be able to get rid of that too, but that's not something that's going to happen. But it's a fairly fixed cost going forward, and life is cheaper when suddenly your housing is paid for. Because I think, as you were already talking earlier in this video, and you've certainly talked about elsewhere, how much you should be spending on different things. And if your money you're making, the amount you're putting into housing is really small, then that gives you even more luxury to consider something that's a pure luxury, like a $100,000 car that you're also going to rack up. I think you know this already, but fingers crossed that you're not unaware that there's going to be tire expenses. Going to burn through tires a lot going to the track. And sadly, the 20-inch wheels, the tire sizes here, they're not super cheap. So there is going to be a tire budget, but it's not going to be dramatically different than what I was spending on the Hoosiers before.
I know Dave Ramsey doesn't borrow money at any time for any reason and would be totally 100% against that plan. But my personal preference is to strike a balance around 5%. If I can borrow money for less than 5%, I prefer to do that because I get inflation working in my favor, And I feel confident that I can grow my money at a higher rate than 5%. What I mean by inflation working in my favor is that I'm borrowing money in today's dollars, but I'm paying it back in future dollars, which are worth less because of inflation. If I borrow $125,000 now, and inflation averages 3% over the next 30 years, I effectively only have to pay back about $52,000. That's assuming I make interest-only payments the whole time and then pay the whole principal back in one chunk. Because paying $125,000 in 30 years would be like paying $52,000 in today's dollars.
Now, this is interesting because I know one of our discussions we've had is the fact of where I balance between 401ks and Roth IRAs. And one of the things I've always thought is a real advantage on the 401k, which you don't think, is roughly the same argument that you're making, is that what I'm not paying in taxes today, I'm going to pay in future dollars, which is worth less, as where I'm cutting my current tax bill. Although to be clear, I still try and balance between those, but that's one of the things that's always struck me as an advantage, where I agree with you completely here, is that if you can pay for something in future dollars, it's going to be worth less. There's always the possibility of deflation, but historically, I don't think we've had deflation in this country for a really, really long time. Have to probably go back, before my lifetime. So I think it's pretty unlikely. And because of the people in control of the economy would be highly disadvantageous for them, I don't think we're ever going to see where someone would ever steer our economy in that direction. So I think that's fairly reliable, even though that again remains a hypothetical, but that's a near certainty.
Since I'm actually paying it back over time, the savings isn't as dramatic as that, but you still get the idea, right? And then let's say we could average a 10% return on our investments. If we borrowed money at 3.25% for 30 years, our payment would be $544.01 every month. If we made 10% on our money, that would be $1,041.67 a month in passive income. So the difference would be $497.66 a month. If we invested that $497.66 a month at 10% in 30 years, we would have an extra $1.1 million in change.
I don't know that you're going to see 10%. And the possibility of seeing a loss, it's possible. So again, going back to what I said before, I bought the car with no debt in low amount of past money. Yes, I could keep projecting forward, but if you wind up in that always projecting forward, you're never going to pull the trigger and do what you want. And what I wanted in this case was to have a faster car to compete at a higher level.
Plus, part of our loan payment was principal. So after 30 years, the loan is completely paid off, and we also have that $125,000 in equity. Instead, what we're doing is selling enough stock to cover the $125,000 cost of the car, plus an extra $25,000 or so to cover the capital gains tax on the sale of the stock. If that extra money could have stayed invested too, that would be almost $500,000 extra in 30 years.
The reason, of course, we have the capital gains issues is the fact that the cost basis on this investment was pretty low. So devil's advocate on your point, you're making all this money and you're going to have to pay the capital gains in the future. So you're paying it at some point. I'm just choosing to pay it now.
So the way I look at it is this car isn't just costing us $125,000. It's costing our future selves over $1.6 million frickin' dollars, which after inflation is still around $900,000 in today's dollars. But it's not costing us our second kid or our house. So I can make peace with that. I'm happy to share that we bought our dream home a few months ago. I posted a new home tour video on my channel, so I'll link to that description if you want to check it out. And as I'm recording this video, I'm 14 weeks pregnant with baby number 2, so please wish us luck.
Yesterday, we got to see the baby essentially wave at us on the ultrasound. That was really cool. I'm not as crazy about number 2, baby number 2, as the name as my wife is, but I think it'll grow on me. I mean, I was a big fan of The Prisoner, and the Leo McKern #2 was pretty cool. So I'll have to get by that, and hopefully both Gabriel and baby #2 will grow up to be car people, because they're going to be around it.
Oh, and in case you're curious about what kind of car Paul bought, I can tell you that it's a blue car, and it's a Porsche. And I'll let Paul tell you his version.
I could go ahead and make this probably a good 30, 40 minutes longer by going through a lot of the little reasons on why I look at this as a great performance platform. And I could probably also spend a little time on the things that I think are going to nag me a little bit about this car, because I don't think any car is perfect. If you're a car person, especially if you're a car person who does any type of competitive car stuff, you realize that everything's a balance. In order to have something, you're giving up something else. I mean, I think one of the classic things people talk about is like, performance, reliability, and cost. Pick two of them. And there's some truth to that. If you go the full name, that's a 718 Cayman GT4. So that's the top level trim GT version of the Cayman, which is a mid-engine 2-seater.
Thank you, Paul. As I'm recording this video, the car isn't actually here yet. It was built in Germany and is supposed to arrive in the United States by the end of January.
The car, unfortunately, won't be here quite for the start of next season. I think, given the stops it's already made, it's actually going to dock in Benicia in about a month. And the car is going to sit in a yard a couple miles from our Benicia home for more than a week before it gets shipped down to LA, where I'll eventually be picking it up at the Porsche Experience Center down there. And then bringing it back up here, where it will have actually already been.
If you'd like to see another video with the actual car, let me know in the comments. Paul said he'd let me test drive it, though I'm super nervous about messing something up.
What I actually said is I'd love to get you out at an autocross or the track to drive it. But yes, you can do a regular test drive if you want, but to actually properly test drive a car like this, you should be someplace where there aren't speed limits or anything like that. But yes, you're welcome to. At least if you're doing it that way, after baby is born, because probably shouldn't do those kind of activities while pregnant.
If you'd like to see more videos from me around personal finance, make sure to subscribe to this channel and click the little bell icon so you see when I make a new video.
Yes, subscribe to our channel. Super important. To go with my son, smash that like button.
I want to give a huge shout out to Paul for agreeing to do this video with me, and a big thank you to you for watching this video all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments how this landed for you. And if you'd like to see a video of me reacting to Paul's reaction, or if I should just leave it here and let him have the last word. Next week, I'll be back to posting more personal finance content, starting with something I get asked about a lot, which is how to find the right financial advisor. So stay tuned.